Welcome to Inside New York.
That's a great question. Thank you.
Hi, this is Shaka Khan, and you're watching Inside New York.
And this year's Tony Award. This is the biggest night on Broadway.
And I'm on Inside New York.
And you better stay right there because we've got a special interview with John Liu, Democratic candidate for mayor.
This is a historic show, and I'm delighted to be part of this.
Welcome to Inside New York. We are proud to have on today's program one of the most progressive mayoral candidates in this year's election. We welcome to Inside New York Comptroller John Liu. Thank you for joining
so
us.
Wonderful, yes.
It's been a while.
I've been waiting for a long time to get on.
Yes. Well, and certainly we should have had you on sooner, but this is a really historical moment to congratulate you on your position as comptroller.
Thank you.
Being the first Asian American,
Yes,
I
believe it or
believe,
not.
but as council member and as comptroller, and maybe as mayor.
Certainly
okay?
hope so. We've got a couple of weeks to go till the big election.
Right. I introduced you as one of the most progressive mayoral candidates, and you have said that you are the most consistently progressive, if not the
that's
most.
the key
So,
thing.
how do you differentiate yourself? Why do you say that?
Well, I think that every candidate claims to be progressive, but I'm very proud of my progressive views and the progressive plans that I've laid out for the future of this city. And I haven't changed any of my positions, so that's what makes me the most consistently progressive candidate in this race. There are lots of things that set me apart. First of all, my background. You know a little bit about it. I have grown up not in politics. Most of my adult career has been outside of politics and government. Professionally, I'm an actuary. I was a manager at a company called PricewaterhouseCoopers. But I ran for office to create some change that I thought was needed. And that's what brought me to politics. Prior to that, I mean, I've got my degree in mathematical physics.
Of all things, not
yes,
even politics,
not in
or political.
No political training for me. My family were immigrants. We had really nothing at all to do with politics or government. But what led me to run for office is to give back to this great city that gave me and my family tremendous opportunities to pursue and in many ways achieve the American dream.
Yes.
And I want to make sure that many more generations of people have that. But I do feel that it's somewhat lost in recent years. That, you know, you're supposed to be able to work hard and dream big and then work a little harder and achieve success. But that promise has been broken for people in recent years. It seems like you could work so hard, try to get ahead or even just to work, and there's some kind of invisible force pulling you backwards. The rent, the food, the transportation costs, they keep going up and up and up. The paychecks are steady, if not, declining as in real terms. And so it's just been much more difficult. I think we need changes. And
Right, talking about changes, specifically what things would you like to change immediately if you are elected mayor?
Well, so there are a lot of changes that I want to make, and I'll give you a few examples of changes that I'm the only person running for office, running for mayor this year who's been talking about making these changes. Number one, I think we need to create jobs. When we create jobs, the best way to create jobs is by going to where the jobs are being created. And it is, for the most part, small businesses. The majority of people who work in New York City are working for small business. So I've called for a tax reduction for small business owners all across the city by having the large corporations pay their fair share and stop getting these kinds of sweetheart deals. I've called for an end to this essentially corporate welfare because we can't afford the billions of dollars of taxpayers' money that's going to these big companies that have been given by the current administration. We need to keep that money to develop our own human capital, keep after-school programs open and fully funded, create job training sites, and even fund the summer youth employment programs that right now, this year, we've got the highest level of applications and the lowest number of jobs. It's shameful.
Okay.
This is a very wealthy city, and we've got to keep the wealth in the hands of the people who have the tremendous amount of potential to actually bring about an economic recovery shared by everybody. I'm also the only candidate that talks about expanding the middle class by also uplifting the working poor.
Yes.
What does that mean? It means that we need to raise our minimum wage, but not raise it arbitrarily, that in a way that it doesn't really make sense. The talk of raising the state minimum wage from $7.25 to $9 an hour sounds good. $9 is of course better than $7.25, but it doesn't account for the fact that in New York City, we've got the highest cost of living in anywhere in the state or the country for that matter. And based on my economic research, we've shown that the minimum wage in New York City should be $11.50 an hour. Why? Because that's how much it takes for somebody working full-time to actually get out of the poverty level. And we've got to remember that it's not teenagers working part-time who are making minimum wage. In most cases, it's adults with kids to feed. It doesn't make any sense for government to mandate a minimum wage at which someone working full-time can't even get out of what government considers poverty. So on those two counts, getting rid of corporate welfare and raising the minimum wage in a way that makes sense, I've been the only candidate that's supportive. Everybody else supports a milder form. They want to reduce the corporate welfare. They support an increase of the minimum wage to $9 an hour. I say get rid of corporate welfare. Let's instead use the money to fund the programs that develop our own human capital, and let's increase the minimum wage to $11.50. And just one other example, the whole issue of stop and frisk and what the judge ruled last week. I was so gratified to hear the judge's ruling, because she basically ruled that stop and frisk was unconstitutional on multiple levels, and that it was essentially racial profiling. Music
Which
to my
is nothing
ears
new
on,
for you.
Right, well, music to my ears on one sense, because this is what I've been saying all along, and I think that the justice's decision and ruling will help us get to the point where we can end stop and frisk. But of course, it's sad that this is in fact happening for so long in New York City, which is why I want to be the person to end stop and frisk once and for all, because I've consistently said that this does not work, it's not right, and we should end it, not tweak it, not reduce it, not bringing it under control, simply end stop and frisk. And I believe we can replace stop and frisk with community policing that will be far more effective at keeping people safe. That's what we need to do.
Well, you know, when I saw you actually at the station last week, it was seemingly a historical moment, because the judge had just handed down that decision, and here you were, who many people may not know, you were in the forefront and distinguished yourself from other politicians by saying, and you can say for yourself, you came out early on against stop and frisk. Would you like to tell our viewers your record? Because everybody comes on, you know, at this hour and says what they're going to do, and says all the right things. I think what's important is to look at the record, and that's what I want you to speak to, is your record in this issue.
I thank you for that. Look, this is a very important issue, and it's an issue of fundamental fairness in my heart. That's why I've been so vocal about this. And you know, I've said for years, it's unconstitutional. Not only that, it's unconscionable, and that it is racial profiling. It's the biggest form of racial profiling anywhere in the United States. Now, look, we have a couple of Billy-come-latelys on this issue that now are saying, oh, they want to end stop and frisk, but they don't actually say they want to end stop and frisk. They say they want to end stop and frisk as we know it, or they want to end unfair stop and frisk. I mean, look,
how could it be
there's all
fair?
These qualifiers, exactly. I want to end stop and frisk. Be very clear. I want to end stop and frisk, and I want to keep people safe and keep crime low by instituting a new era of community policing, where the police work hand in hand with clergy members, with pastors, with imams, with rabbis, business owners, community activists, who I believe generally know where the problems are. They should be working with the police so that police can focus their resources on rooting out the problems, instead of spreading their resources wide and thin, catching so many people in the net, almost all of whom have done nothing wrong. It's a question of basic fairness. And you know,
And just yesterday, weren't there 2 rulings that will help protect people's rights in that regard?
Well, and so yesterday the City Council overrode the mayor's veto of 2 bills that I think are necessary. They're part of what's called the Community Safety Act. One bans racial profiling. The other one institutes an inspector general. And look, I mean, the inspector general issue, I have not been fully supportive of that because I've called it a distraction. It's a convenient excuse for people who aren't in favor of ending stop and frisk to be able to say, well, they support an inspector general to make sure that stop and frisk doesn't get out of control.
Right.
If you end stop and frisk, period, which I think is the root issue here, you don't need this inspector general. But not, be that as it may, it's certainly better than what we have now, which is really rampant stop and frisk. You know, look, targeting hundreds of thousands of people, mostly people of color, almost all of whom have done nothing wrong. And I believe that these changes are necessary in the city of New York because this brings the city back into the hands of the people. For too long, the city is now focused on billionaires and corporations. We need to refocus the city on residents, on working men and women, on small business owners, the people who really, at the end of the day, make the city tick. And it's the same kind of background that I've got. An immigrant route that really had nothing to do with government or politics, as I mentioned.
Yes. And you were, you know, the subject of, I don't know if you'd call it racism, but certainly I know growing up, reading your story, that, you know, a lot of the, you know, discomfort that people of color have experienced, you were a victim of as well. So has that in any way made you so much more supportive of people of color in the city?
I think it's a number of different things. I mean, look, I have had my share of difficult days when I was a kid in school. You know, really being the only Asian kid around, and you know, people. I remember the first time I got punched in the stomach because you know, people called me a chink, and I couldn't breathe for a couple of minutes. To less overt things like the entire class when they would serve hot lunch at lunch, when they would serve rice during lunch, the entire class would pass their rice to me because, you know, that was what I ate. So look, these are things you grow up with and you never forget about it. But I think it's also about my mom working to the bone, you know, from the time she woke up every day until right before she went to sleep. She was always working all the time. Sweatshops, garment factories. Look, she did what she needed to do, and my dad worked hard also. They did what they needed to do to actually lift us into the middle class, which they were able to do after toiling, after working to the bone for many years. And so we were able to pursue the American dream and achieve it. But I just want to make sure that other people have that same opportunity. And that's why I'm running for office. Look, the first time I ran for office for city council, people asked me, why are you running? You can't win. I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, you know, this is New York City, and an Asian American has never won an election here before. I looked them straight in the eyes. I said, well, you know what? We do need to change. And I've got a great team. We're on the right side of the issues. And later that year, I was elected and became the first Asian American elected to the New York City Council. And I served there for 8 years, actually more years than I thought I would be there, because I had a great career already, but I put the career on hold just to really give back to this great city. And so 4 years ago, I took a shot for comptroller, and when I was running for comptroller, guess what? People asked me, why are you running? You can't win. Okay. Like, what are you talking about? Oh, well, you know, city controller is a pretty important position, and the city of New York is a big place, and maybe the people of this city are not quite ready for someone like you. Well, I just basically ignored it. What are you talking about? I looked them straight in the eyes. I said, we need a change. And I've got the right people. We're on the right side of the issues. And sure enough, at the end of 2009, I was elected New York City Comptroller. You know, I'm far beyond anything I imagined would happen in my lifetime. And to be sitting with you talking about running for mayor of New York City, wow, this is a great city. And as much as it is a great city where, as I said before, you work hard, you dream big, and then you work a little harder, you can achieve great success. There are still pundits and pollsters who are asking me, why are you running? You can't win.
And-
I've heard it, been there, done that. We're going to show these pundits once again how it's really done, and how at the end of the day, it's not these numbers based on a relatively small, tiny amount of people that they actually telephone or are able to get through on the telephone. But at the end of the day, it's what the people do on election day that counts.
Yes. And, well, having said that, you have one challenge,
Yes.
one major challenge, and I want you to speak to that because a lot of people don't know. They know there was all this suspicion, and I
Right.
hope that this doesn't tire you to speak to
Well,
it. But I think it needs to be clarified because you were never
Absolutely.
charged, and yet there's this, so-called scandal that has no basis in fact.
So you're talking about
so-
the investigation into
Right.
my campaign fundraising.
How long has that been going
It's
on?
been going on for more than 4 years now. I didn't even
Right.
know about it until a couple of years ago. And it had already been going on for 2.5 years. Look,
And they've come up with nothing. You
Yeah.
haven't been formally charged, but at the same time, it prevented you from getting campaign funds for this election that
That's
you're
right.
running for. So that,
It's
I
a-
sure, hampered you, and I think it needs to be addressed. Also, where you think it may be coming from, you know?
well, I think it's fair to say that after my going after Mayor Bloomberg, the MTA, powerful real estate interests, big Wall Street corporations, and huge defense contractors that have ripped us off, our taxpayers off to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. I think it's fair to say when you go after some pretty powerful interests, they're going to come after you. And in fact, that's what's happened with this investigation. Look, I raised funds for my campaign like any other candidate. Although I've got much stricter limitations, I don't accept contributions from people who do business with the city. I'm the only controller in history that does not accept contributions from Wall Street. All my predecessors did that, and other controllers around the country currently do that. And yet, for some reason, I'm the only one that gets investigated for my fundraising. Look, I've got nothing to hide. I'm very proud of what we've been able to do. We've got the largest proportion of small donors. I don't rely on big contributions. We've got the most number of, by far, I mean, almost all of my donors are immigrants, and they have, for the most part, never given to any political campaign before. So it's my campaign that's actually involving or getting people more involved in the political process, which I believe is always good. So these last few years, yeah, I mean, look, they've thrown everything in the kitchen sink at me. They've made innuendos, baseless innuendos about what I've done. They have entrapped a couple of people. They have denied me of matching funds for my campaign. But you know what? At the end of the day, this campaign, it was never about the money. This campaign is about the people, about the volunteers we have on the ground, about the supporters we have in every neighborhood in the city, about the strength of our message and the change that we need in this city. And so today, I'm proud to have served as New York City Comptroller, and I'm proud to be the most thoroughly investigated candidate in the history of New York City. But no matter what curveballs they throw at me, I'm never going to relent because I firmly believe in the changes that I want to make. Some of the changes that we talked about, but other changes, restoring a learning environment to our schools instead of running them as if they're business divisions, building affordable housing so that people can actually live in this city as opposed to being driven out, and just taking care of the city. At the end of the day, getting the city out of the hands of the billionaires and corporations and putting it back into the hands of men and women, the working people who actually made this city great in the first place.
You mentioned education, and there has been a change, obviously, under Mayor Bloomberg. Do you believe that the mayor's office should be in control of the Board of Ed, or do you wish to
I believe
change
that the mayor should take upon him or herself the responsibility of educating our kids properly. The education system is by far our largest single budget item in the New York City budget. It's 1/3 of the city's budget. And the mayoral control system is actually not within the hands of the mayor to decide. It's up to the state legislature, and the current system goes through 2015. What my promise is, whatever the system the state legislature imposes on the city of New York, as mayor, I will uphold education to be top priority. I'm a product of New York City public schools, kindergarten through 12th grade. Same with my wife, Jenny. Our son, Joey, is now halfway through. He's going to be in the 8th grade, and I think they've done a magnificent job of his critical thinking skills, because that's the only way I can explain how perfectly sarcastic this 12-year-old could be with his mom and dad.
Yes. Well, there are others who also are very supportive of charter schools, and that's a whole nother discussion I'm sure that we'll have to have. But
I'd love to come back on, because
yes,
there are a lot of issues that we need to talk about.
Right. But the unions have backed you. You're always out in the community. You have so many fans and supporters of your, I think, grassroots efforts and outreach. I know that you were responsible for Sonny Carson's, I think the street was named after him, and you were also involved with the Central Park 5, trying to get support for them. So these are things that you typically don't think of a controller, you know, being involved in, or someone who may be outside of a certain community being part of. I just saw Kwame Brathwaite, and I understand you were there at Alumbe Brathwaite's tribute. So, you know, you are definitely a person of diverse communities. How is it that you're able to connect so well, and you know, where does that come from, this commitment to the community?
Well, I just remember I ran for office because there are certain injustices that I think should not be allowed to continue. And in the case of the Central Park 5, I mean, look, these men, they spent a collective 36 or 37 years in prison for something they did not do. And it's been more than 10 years that they've been exonerated. And yet the city of New York refuses to acknowledge that there's any kind of liability. A mistake was made. Some people would call it not a mistake, that there was some kind of intent there. But whatever you call it, something wrong occurred. And there's got to be some compensation so that we're not just making these men whole. I don't think we can do anything to make them truly whole from what they had to go through. Not just the prison years, but the fact that they were vilified by the press in the aftermath of that, the horrific attack. Don't get me wrong, the horrific attack on a young woman in Central Park. But
they were falsely accused,
and they were falsely accused and imprisoned. And so that's something that there has to be compensation for, not just for them, but to bring some kind of accountability to the system so that we prevent this kind of thing from happening again. You know, let's be real. The Central Park 5 is not the only case where people have been wrongfully imprisoned. We've got to make the system better and better and better. And what that means is that when something wrong has occurred, there's got to be compensation. In the case of Sonny Carson, I just want to clear the record. I'm not a fan of Sonny Carson. I did not like the guy. I did not like what he talked about, especially when, you know, a lot of times he would use his inflammatory rhetoric against Asian Americans. But I felt that the community in Brooklyn had been through an extended debate at that point, 18 months of discussions. And as much as the city council simply rubber-stamped all the other community board decisions when it came to renaming streets after people, I felt that the city council should not hold a double standard in that case, that the community had already made up its mind after an extended debate, and we should not overrule what the community board did, which is why I voted in support of upholding the community board's decision. Even though, I gotta say, I was not a fan of Sonny Carson.
Okay, talking about someone, though, I think you might be a fan of, and this is the eve of the march of the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. I have been told that some of the mayoral candidates will be going. I know you're going to try, but how would you like to describe your sentiment towards that the leader and the march itself? Yes.
The historic march 50 years ago, and the things that he said, and really the movement that was kicked into action after that march. I mean, it's just an incredible moment in history that tomorrow will be the 50th anniversary. Actually, in a couple of days, in a few days, it'll be the 50th anniversary of. And bottom line, I think it's simple. I wouldn't be sitting with you here today as New York City comptroller and a candidate for mayor if Dr. King had not spawned this civil rights movement that today allows someone like me to pursue these kinds of opportunities. So I stand on the shoulders of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, as well as many other giants who have paved the trail in the civil rights movement, so that I could follow behind and hope to follow in their footsteps and fill their shoes.
Well, you know, some of the issues are voter rights, and obviously they're marching tomorrow to realize the dream that he started. How close do you think we are to that dream, and where would you like to see the country go towards it?
We have obviously made progress, but there are still many problems. And I think that one big thing that I believe has set us back is the racial profiling that's somehow become accepted by governments in different parts of the country, starting with our own right here, where you have, you know, let's take a look at some of the big incidents that have caused outrage. Zimmerman being acquitted in the shooting death of young Trayvon Martin. The fact that no charges are being brought against the officer that killed Romali Graham in his own house. And you know, I think there's a pervasive mindset that, oh, if you're a young person of color, you must be up to some no good. And that, I think, allows someone like Mayor Bloomberg to make these outrageous comments that, oh, you know what, we should actually conduct more stop and frisks of African Americans and Latinos and fewer stops and frisks of whites. And it is that mindset that rationalizes and justifies that the stop and frisk program that happens here in New York City and racial profiling is okay. It is not okay. And the best way we can commemorate the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King this year is by ending stop and frisk and ending racial profiling here in New York City, which then will translate into many other jurisdictions in the country. And that's what I hope Mayor Bloomberg does not continue to appeal the judge's decision. I think Mayor Bloomberg should, in his final months, use this opportunity, just, you know, be big and say, okay, look, we tried that, it didn't work, so I want to be known as the mayor who brought about true economic and true equal opportunity, economic and otherwise.
Well, thank you so much.
It's been such a pleasure, Joan.
You've been so generous with your time. You've answered just about all of my questions, and I'm sure many of the questions of our viewers.
Thank you for joining Inside New York for our special presentation with mayoral candidate John Liu. We look forward to seeing you again next Saturday at 8:30 p.m. on Channel 56. See you then.